Hey everyone, so Sig put out a pretty terrible, and I mean just bad, PR statement in regards to the 320, basically saying there's no problem. There's no problem in the Earth Kingdom, you know? There is absolutely zero problem. The gun cannot go off on its own without the trigger being pulled. And I think I am going to get a lot of hate for this because it's going to sound like I'm completely disregarding the problems with Sig, and I'm not. There are problems with the 320 that we will address in this video, but I think there's also a lot of people have a lot of fun. You know, I know you all say you don't like drama, but you do. You watch the videos, you click on them, you engage with them, you talk about people's sexual habits of certain creators. You like talking about it. Don't say you don't. So I wanted to talk about a few things that I've seen circulating, a few problems with the 320, and then a few reasons to maybe, you know, either consider these problems or not consider certain problems. I think we have to start off the rip by just saying, yes, the original models of P320 pre-voluntary upgrade, or whatever they were calling it, could go off if dropped at about a 45-degree angle on the rear sight. The gun could go off by the inertia of the trigger moving to the rear, firing the gun. That was a problem, and I don't think anyone should ever let Sig off the hook for it. But that's no longer a problem on the current P320s, and I'm going to elaborate why I specifically think that, because the California Department of Justice, of all people, has a vested interest in not allowing guns to be sold, and they couldn't stop the 320 from being sold. But before we get going, I'm doing a giveaway every month. You might have seen it on my community tab. $200 to one person, renamay.com/giveaway or something like that. I'll have a link in the description. There are free entries, but there are other ways to enter as well by purchasing a Rise trigger with code RENO20, saves you 20%. But anyways, back to the drop safety issue. We're going to talk about the drop safety, out of battery issues, magazine over insertion, and then we're going to talk kind of about some of the lawsuits with a lawyer that has a vested interest. So the drop safety issue, obviously big problem. On the current guns, they are, in my opinion, completely drop safe. If you drop a current model P320 that has not had any of the internal safeties deactivated, that is not faulty, that is not broken, whatever, if you drop a current edition P320 on the ground, it will not go off. I've personally tested this at great depth with one of my P320X fulls, that is the California legal model. I did that with the magazine inserted because it has a magazine disconnect. I put a primed case in it. I dropped it a shit ton of times. Now, the California Department of Justice has certain requirements for a gun to get on the California handgun roster, which is a law that I am challenging in court with the CRPA. In order for a gun to get on the California handgun roster in the state of California, part of it is involving drop testing. They have to send it off to an accredited lab, and they do a variety of function testing, fire testing, a whole lot of shooting of it, and then they drop it a ton of times. And if they can get the gun to go off, it fails, and then they have to resubmit, make some changes, resubmit, go through the whole process again. This California Department of Justice has done a lot of things to get a lot of guns that are on the roster removed just by changing the color of some internal parts, or maybe they heat treat certain things differently. They've done a lot of things for Smith & Wesson, HK, CZ. Due to completely benign changes, they removed them from the roster. They've also done a lot of things to firearms that were trying to get added to the California handgun roster and said, hey, you know, it doesn't meet the requirements because your loaded chamber indicator isn't indicatey enough, or your magazine disconnect is not magazine disconnecty enough. They've done a lot to stop guns from getting on the roster. They've done a lot to remove guns from the roster, and they've been unable to stop the P320 from getting on the roster and staying on the roster. So in my opinion, the current edition of P320s, if you've not modified any of the internals in a way that deactivates internal safeties, if the gun isn't broken or faulty or defective, Sig QC, that's something that you should consider. There's a lot of people talking about it, whether it's real or not, you know, it's hard to say. It's a super popular gun. There's a lot of them out there, so there's going to be more issues because there's simply more of them in existence. But I think that those guns are currently fine when it comes to drop safety. The out-of-battery disconnect, or the out-of-battery detonations, that's another thing that people talk about a lot, and that sort of goes tied together with the non-fully supported chamber on the barrels. Don't quote me on all of this because these are some technical things that I'm not super well educated on. I'm going to be honest about that. I've defaulted to just people that seem to be experts in the SIG field, and we got to take that with a grain of salt. people who are experts in manufacturing, modifying, designing parts for the Sig P320, Sig 226, and a variety of other Sig platforms have all come out and said, and they've done some pretty crazy testing, like defeating a lot of the lockup mechanisms, showing that the gun cannot, in its stock configuration when functioning properly, cannot go and detonate out of battery. But we've seen multiple P320s explode, often with competition shooters, which sort of muddies the water because those people shoot. They actually shoot their guns a whole lot. Sometimes they use reloads. Sometimes they're shooting so fast that maybe there's a squib. Who knows? There's a lot to kind of consider and kind of look at that and be, hey, maybe that's something to be concerned about. And if you are concerned about this, and I don't know why Sig just doesn't make this change to begin with, the Sig Armorer makes a part called the Sport Disconnector, which basically takes the amount of distance that the gun can fire while being out of battery. It shortens the amount of space that the slide can be pulled to the rear and still fire. Because most pistols that use that similar type of lockup mechanism can fire with the slide pulled back just a smidge, just a itty bit. And it seems like some people were saying that the P320 has a longer distance that it can be out of battery, or longer range of in battery than other firearms, and coupled with the non-fully supported chamber of the barrel, it could go off. It could explode on you. Well, the Sig Armorer has a disconnector that greatly shortens the amount of distance that it can be out of battery before it will allow it or not allow it to fire. It's like $40. It's not that hard to install. If you're concerned about it and you have a P320, it's worth it, in my opinion. And his trigger kits are fantastic, so they come with it. Might as well install one, right? So I don't know why Sig themselves doesn't just implement that. And I think that is another knock to Sig. Obviously, the first one was the initial 320s could go off if dropped just right, and they didn't do a recall. They did a voluntary upgrade. I think that's wrong, personally. The out of battery disconnect. Why don't they just fix that? Why don't they just fix that? It seems simple. Someone's already done the work. Why don't they just do it? I really doubt that guy can patent that, because it's a part for, I don't know. Maybe he has it patented and I don't know that. But I don't know why they don't just either license it out and make that modification, or just make that modification, because it seems pretty simple. It seems like there's no downside. Win-win. Just do it. So we've talked about the dropping, talked about the out of battery. Let's talk about the magazine over insertion issue. So Chairman Juan brought this to my attention. It's something that I kind of heard of before, but there's a simple fix. So what the problem is, on a slide lock reload, if you hold the magazine release and keep it pressed in and slam the magazine in with many configurations of frames and magazines, you can over insert the magazine to a point that it bends the ejector of the firearm, the part that kicks the round out of the chamber. Your extractor pulls it from the chamber, the ejector pushes it out of the slide. That's a very crucial part. And if you over insert, either by holding the mag release, or maybe you just over insert and monkey that reload, you can actually cause that ejector to bend. Now, unfortunately, unlike a 1911 and some other firearms, the ejector is part of the fire control unit, which is the firearm. So if you damage that ejector, you damage your gun. And Sig will do a one-time fix for you. And what the fix is hammering it into place. But that's not right. I don't think that's right. Most of the most common configurations of magazines that they sell and grips that they sell do not have that over insertion, because the over insertion stop is built into the base plate of the M18 and M17. So the M18 and M17 have solved that by that little cutout on the grip and that notch on the magazine base plate. But most of their models can use magazines that do not comply and do not work together, and you can damage it like that. Well, Chairman Wong is working on a 3D printed and a metal fix for the X frames that has, basically it's just a little part that goes in where you put weights in the back of the 320 grip, and it stops it from over inserting. This is an easy fix that Sig could implement without having to use his design. There's a variety of methods that a variety of manufacturers have figured out how to stop magazines from over inserting. So why don't they just fix that? So we've talked about those three issues. Now let's talk about Sig's comments on the anti-gun agenda. They kind of pulled a little scapegoat of saying all the people talking bad about the 320, it's just anti-gun people, anti-Sig people. They have an agenda. And I think that was a bad way of phrasing that, because yes, there's a little bit of truth to it, But a lot of these criticisms are coming mostly from people like you and me, people that are overly invested in firearms and love firearms. Now, my personal investment in this is I like shooting the 320. I really do. I think there's problems with it. I think there's ways that they could fix a lot of these problems, and I don't know why they don't. I think they really dropped the ball initially. I currently do not have any connection or relation with Sig. Sig has sent me some firearms, but the guy that I previously was working with at Sig left the company to go work somewhere else. And now the person that he put me in touch with after, I don't think I could get them to piss on my head if my hair was on fire. So I have no personal connection with Sig currently. I've never been paid by them. I've been sent firearms and I've reviewed them and I've enjoyed them. But that's it. I currently have no relation with Sig, and I got no dog in this fight really, other than the fact that I simply want the guns to be good because I do really enjoy shooting my X5 Legion. It's awesome. I really like shooting it. So the anti-gun agenda, there is one specific lawyer who has filed a numerous amount of cases against Sig. And it's pretty clear that this, in my opinion, that this guy is a bit of an ambulance chaser. He sees a route. He's going to keep throwing darts at the board until he finds one that sticks. And I think Ben Stoger, sorry, I don't know how to pronounce his name. I buy stuff from his website, but I don't know how to pronounce his name. Anyways, Ben Stoger, great shooter, interesting guy. I like his videos. I watch pretty much every single one of them. They're very low effort, but I love it. It's just him chatting, bantering in the comments. I think that's awesome. He put a post up about a lawsuit, Guai versus Sig. And it was an article from the lawyer that basically said, judge agrees P320 goes off without being pulled, right? That was the summary of it. Well, if you look at some of the details, that article was written by the lawyer years after the case was settled. The case was ruled in favor by a jury and by the judge in favor of Sig completely. So it was just a clear misrepresentation of what happened. The story that the guy says is that he was walking his dog, he comes home, goes to remove the gun from the holster, and it shoots him in the leg. Why is it that every single time, or pretty much every single time, it's either someone using a bad holster, using no holster, using an improper holster, or while they're monkeying with the gun, reholstering or holstering the firearm, or they're cops? I'm not going to elaborate on that one. I think you guys can all figure out what I mean by that. It seems like there's a common denominator here, right? Someone does something stupid, in my opinion, the gun shoots them. I don't know. Anyways, the judge basically said in one part of the ruling that the story was potentially plausible. What is also plausible is that this guy was removing the gun from the holster and shot himself. That's equally plausible, and ultimately, the judge and the jury ruled that there was no proof or evidence that the gun could go off without being pulled. They said the story was plausible, but there was no actual empirical evidence that could point to this gun was faulty in some way or that this gun even could go off. So I think there's a lot to it. There was another lawsuit that Sig lost that the reason it lost was because it's a striker-fired mechanism. It did not have a physical thumb safety, and it did not have a trigger dingus. Well, a trigger dingus, if you don't know what that means, is, on a Glock, how you got that little blade on the trigger? On the M&Ps, they got the little curvy trigger. If you have a trigger dingus, apparently you're immune to these types of lawsuits. But the judge ruled that because it does not have a thumb safety on that model, and because you had no trigger dingus, Sig was liable for $11 million. Now, Sig is going to appeal this, and they're likely going to win in the end. But I think that's pretty crazy, right? If that's all it takes is for a gun to be capable of going off, every 1911 manufacturer that makes Series 70 1911s should be afraid right now, because that is something that could just easily screw them over. Those guns can go off if they're dropped, and it could shoot someone. So I think there's a lot more to this. There's a little bit of nuance, but it is fun to talk about, so I figured I'd just talk about it with you guys today. So the 1911s, those being a problem, I think that's a very similar concern. It's just interesting that one lawyer has filed so many lawsuits against Sig and lost basically all of them. So I think Sig's comments, terrible PR statement. If you're gonna address these things, you have to address everything. You either got to shut the fuck up about it like they have for years about any of the problems, or you need to put out a much better statement and reply to the actual concerns that people have. So If you think I'm a Sig lover, if you think I'm a Sig hater, I don't know. I don't really care. Just let me know down in the comments. I think there's a lot more to this conversation to have than people are really allowing, because it's fun to shit on Sig. I know you guys love it. You pretend like you don't. You love it. You love it. You yearn for it. Anyways, hope you all had fun and learned something today. Maybe you didn't. Maybe you did. Peace.